الحمد لله رب العالمين، وأشهد أن لا إله إلا الله ولي الصالحين، وأشهد أن سيدنا ونبينا وحبيبنا محمدا عبده ورسوله صلى الله تعالى عليه وعلى آله وأصحابه ومن استنى بسنته واهتدى بهداه إلى يوم الدين. The theme of this conference is the development of human resources in North America. We can, of course, address the development of resources from the standpoint of school, from the standpoint of masjids and Islamic centers. But it would appear to me that the covering of the topic would be incomplete without touching on the role of the family in the development of these resources. The family is mentioned in the Quran as one of the greatest blessings of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. I realize that the time is quite short, so I would not be able to go on, make lots of documentation, and I'm sure you're all familiar with that, so I'll just try to put it in a briefer way. But this very blessing that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala speaks about in the Quran, about the family, could itself be reversed. That's why we read in the Quran, فَلَا تُعْجِبْكَ أَمْوَالُهُمْ وَلَا أَوْلَادُهُمْ إِنَّمَا يُرِيدُ اللَّهُ لِيُعَذِّبَهُم بِهَا فِي الدُّنْيَا وَتَزْهَقَ أَنفُسُهُمْ وَهُمْ كَافِرُونَ. Don't be over-fascinated with their property or their children. Allah punishes them with this property and children in this life, and they will die in the state of kufr, وَالْعِيَاذُ بِاللَّهِ. Which means that what normally can be a blessing, having property or having family or children, while it is a blessing, it could be a source of difficulty. Lots of Muslims living in North America appreciate and understand this ayah more than others, because we hear about many Muslims, unfortunately, who have not done much for their children, whose children are the very source of their suffering and their torment when they are not on the right path. In order for us as Muslims to realize this blessing and to avoid this reversal of the blessing, it is very important to establish a family based on Islam. By that we mean a family structure which is based on belief in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, commitment to follow His path, and also based on following as close as we can the conception framework and the directions and values that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has provided us to have a healthy family. In order to deal with this in a more concrete way, inshallah we'll be talking mainly about marital relationship, husband-wife relationship, which is the nucleus of a healthy family. And then inshallah we'll touch briefly on parent-children relationship in Islamic context. When we deal with the marital relationship, I think we are all accustomed to books and speeches that start by rights of husbands, then rights of wives. Well, that's a legitimate way of dealing with it. It would have occurred to my mind, however, that it might be useful perhaps to try to deal with it in a slightly different way by looking at the two sides of the same coin. That is, taking each of the rights or responsibilities for husband and try to look at it also from the other side. This way, I hope we can have a more clear and distinct picture. To start with, if we begin with the husband, a duty on the husband, of course, is to have the love and compassion towards his wife. As Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala describes the relationship, وَجَعَلَ بَيْنَكُمْ مَوَدَّةً وَرَحْمَةً, that Allah ordained between you, that is you and your spouses, mercy and compassion, or love and compassion. But this compassion and mercy can be elaborated further and understood more clearly with the other beautiful citation in the Quran in Surah Al-Baqarah, هُنَّ لِبَاسٌ لَكُمْ وَأَنْتُمْ لِبَاسٌ لَهُنَّ. Literally meaning that your wives are like garments to you, you like garments to them. Well, this might be a poor translation. However, even if you look at the functions of the garment, it provides protection from heat and cold. So does the dress provide, or the marriage provide protection for both from evil and temptation. The garment beautifies and completes the person. So does marriage. No wonder the Prophet ﷺ says that one who gets married, he has already fulfilled half of his faith or religion. Let him be aware of Allah in the other half. The clothing gives warmth to the individual. It is the closest thing to the person or the garment. So should the husband and wife be to each other. In order to get as close as possible to this beautiful model that the Quran describes, there are a number of guidelines. The guidelines do not start after marriage, but even before marriage. To make sure that this relationship, inshallah, would mature and come to fruition, the initial selection of the spouse should be based on the proper criteria. As the Prophet ﷺ in more than one hadith indicated that people seek marriage because of the beauty of the woman, because of her wealth, or because of the nobility of her family, and because of her religiosity. And then he said that, of course, the winner, as you all know from this hadith, the real winner is the one who marries a woman because of her religiosity. It doesn't mean, of course, that beauty and other things are not important. If all of them are there, of course, like they say in Arabic, it's fine to have all of them, but one should really be clear about the priorities. Now, to make sure again that we are not looking at things partially or from just one side or the other, we find that the same criteria for selection apply to a woman also approving or accepting a future husband. That's why we find that Al-Hassan, the grandson of the Prophet ﷺ, was once asked by a man. He said, I have a daughter, and to whom should I give her in marriage? He said, give her in marriage to one who fears Allah, a person who is pious. Because if he loves her, he will be generous with her, but if he hates her, he will not be unfair to her. So we can say that while some of the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ might be speaking about one sex or the other, it does not necessarily mean that the basic principle of proper choice does not apply the other way around. A second aspect that is also characterized by mutuality is the treatment of one's wife. The Prophet ﷺ indicated clearly that the most perfect of believers are those who are best in conduct, and the best of you are the best to their wives. In the Quran itself even, we find a clear reference, وَعَاشِرُهُنَّ بِالْمَعْرُوفِ, that is, dwell with them, that is, with your wives, in ma'ruf. The word ma'ruf connotes kindness and equity. The Prophet ﷺ overemphasized that, in fact, because apparently there were lots of people in his time, and perhaps until today, who perceive of manliness or manhood in a slightly different way than the Prophet taught. And we have found in many cultures people who think that in order for the man to be really strong and manly and hamish, like they say, he's got to be really very harsh with his wife. And they think that this is the proper way around it. While the Prophet ﷺ says it is only the generous in character who is good to women, and it is the wicked who insults them. But what is even more important and more revealing than the words of the Prophet ﷺ are the actions of the Prophet. He did not just preach us how to deal with our wives, he himself gave us the perfect example for this. Many of us, when we think about such a great personality, the greatest human being created by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and imagine the Prophet racing with Aisha, running. Imagine the Prophet running and Aisha is running, and everybody is trying to catch up with the other and beat the other. Of course, not in front of everybody, but when it is some privacy, he did that. And actually, Aisha radiallahu anha says that one time she raced with the Prophet. At that time she was young and light. She won the race. And then she said when the fat became heavier, when she really became a little heavier, she raced with the Prophet and he won. And when she was upset, he was telling her 1 for 1. So imagine this notion of a great Prophet, sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, trying to please and be simple with his wife to the point of even running and trying to beat her or letting her beat him. In another occasion, when some Ethiopian male dancers, I emphasize that, male dancers were making a war dance in the masjid of the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. And he offered Aisha to come and, climb behind his shoulder in order to watch. And she leaned her cheek on the cheek of the Prophet ﷺ and kept watching. And then he asked her, did you watch enough, Aisha? She said, no. He didn't say, oh, come on, enough is enough. He let her watch as long as she wanted. Aisha, in fact, was quite smart, because later on she said, I didn't really want to watch anymore when he asked me, but I wanted to test my situation and my status with the Prophet ﷺ, how much he loved me. The Prophet ﷺ, whenever he entered on Aisha when she was still young, finding her playing with the other young girls with kind of what you might call dollies today, and never, stopped them or said, "What nonsense are you doing?" or anything like that. But he smiled and, joked with them and didn't really take any harsh approach toward them. This good treatment is not only when there's only Romeo and Juliet and just when everything is perfect and there's no difficulty. The Quran even directs the husband that even if he hates his wife, that's no reason to be unfair or unjust to her. We find that both in the Quran and the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ. In the ayah that was cited earlier, وَعَاشِرُهُنَّ بِالْمَعْرُوفِ فَإِنْ كَرِهْتُمُوهُنَّ فَعَسَىٰ أَنْ تَكْرَهُوا شَيْئًا وَيَجْعَلَ اللَّهُ فِيهِ خَيْرًا كَثِيرًا. Dwell with them, that is with your wives, in kindness and fairness. But if you happen to hate them, then you may be hating something in which Allah has placed much good, reminding the person that the family skirmishes and difficulties and what one may hate or dislike in his wife, he might be really underestimating other goodness in her. The Prophet ﷺ put it even in a way that's very explicit, as narrated in Muslim, when he said that let no believing man, he means husband, in the context actually of marital relationship, hates a believing woman, i.e. a wife. If he accepts or if he dislikes or hates something of her character, he should find something else that satisfies him. That is, إن كره منها خلقا رضي منها آخر. Should be able to be realistic and assess the woman or the wife as a whole. Maybe she has weakness, but she might have good points. And in one sense, the Prophet ﷺ is reminding us also that we should not expect to have an ideal wife who's always perfect in everything, 100%, while we ourselves cannot claim that perfection. The same point applies also the other side of the coin to the sisters, to the wives. The duty of the wife is to respect her husband and to obey him and to avoid causing anything that irritates him or bothers him. The directives in this are clear also in the Quran. The Quran makes it clear that the husbands are responsible for their families and they have the leadership role. الرجال قوامون على النساء, that men are supposed to be maintainers, in charge, leaders or heads of their families. In the very same ayah, it describes good women. فَالصَّالِحَاتُ قَانِتَاتُ حَافِظَاتُ لِلْغَيْبِ بِمَا حَفِظَ اللَّهِ. Truly pious women are obedient, which means obedient both to Allah and to their husbands, and they protect or safeguard their honor, that is, and their property, that's what it means, in the absence of their husbands, as Allah wants them protected or guarded. The Quran makes it clear again in terms of the leadership of the family. وَلِلْرِجَالِ عَلَيْهِنَّ دَرَجَةٌ. That is, for women, they have rights similar to the rights of their husbands over them, but men has a degree above them. That's not a degree of superiority, it is the degree of leadership. And maybe this is the point that has come up in the earlier session on Islamic education, but perhaps we can elaborate a little bit on that, on the concept of qiwama and the concept of leadership. First of all, when the Quran and the Prophet ﷺ emphasize the necessity of the wife, quote unquote, to obey her husband or to be cooperative with him, it is limited by other aspects of Sharia. First of all, it is limited by the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ narrated in At-Tirmidhi. لا طاعة لمخلوق في معصية الخالق. No human being can claim or demand any obedience in anything that represents disobedience to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And this is a very important point because many times some sisters, you'll be surprised, some sisters ask this question and they say, Alhamdulillah, Allah guided me and I am now beginning to observe hijab, but my husband doesn't want me. My husband forbids me. And at worst, even he might say, I forbid you because Islam says you must obey me. Which is a very strange type of logic. No obedience to any human in anything that's contrary to the commands of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. One cannot equate them or put the human obedience above the obedience of Allah. The other limitation, which is very clear also, as narrated both in Bukhari and Muslim, إِنَّمَا الطَّاعَةُ فِي الْمَعْرُوفِ. Obedience is only in something which is reasonable and appropriate. In other words, if the husband asks his wife, for example, to climb to the 10th flight and throw herself out of the window and say, obey me because you're my wife, of course there is absolutely no reason for her to obey because this is an unreasonable request. If he calls her from work and he says, in 15 minutes I am coming home and bringing with me 23 guests, and you must have 15 different dishes before we come. Well, of course, obviously that's not a reasonable request to make, and as such, this is not what the Quran and the Sunnah really speak about. A third qualification is, what do we mean by obedience? Sometimes in Western societies we take the word obedience as if it's something really degrading. Obey as if you're just army and your will and your personality is totally cancelled. You have just to listen. The dictatorial nature of leadership. Whereas when you look at it, you find that there is clear evidence in the Quran that there is expectation and demand that there should be consultation between husband and wife, even though the husband still have the final word. And the evidence is amazing, because the ayah which describes the consultation between husband and wife actually deal with the case of divorce. Imagine the hard attitude involved in divorce, and even then the Quran says, still, you must consult. The ayah, فَإِنْ أَرَادَ فِصَالًا عَنْ تَرَاضٍ مِنْهُمَا وَتَشَاوُرٍ فَلَا جُنَاحَ عَلَيْهِمَا. That is, if husband and wife that is in the process of divorce agree to wean the child, notice here, عَنْ تَرَاضٍ مِنْهُمَا وَتَشَاوُرٍ. After mutual acceptance and consultation among themselves, then there is no blame on them. And if consultation and listening to somebody's opinion, that one's partner in life opinion, is required in the case of divorce, would it not be required in the case of even normal day-to-day life? When we talk about obedience in Islam, we're not talking about total subjugation or a person who claims that he's got all wisdom and there is nobody who should discuss with him, that he is the major general of the household, and the wife, as mentioned before, is the sergeant. Obey and listen, or the private even. Just do without discussion. I'm not inviting sisters, however, to adopt the attitude of nagging to their husbands, and whenever something is discussed, they keep arguing and creating a big problem out of a small issue. But what we're saying here, that the appeal is made to both. That the attitude in essential nature should be the attitude of mutual consultation, respect of each other's opinion, listening, not, oh, she's a woman after all, let her talk, I'm closing my ears, or I am hearing but not listening. That's not the attitude. One should respect, should listen, should discuss, should give his points. However, if the husband insists on one particular path after he had sincerely listened, the wife also should be cooperative and should not create much problem and keep saying that your opinion is just as good as mine. Because if even two males working together adopt this attitude, your opinion is as good as mine, they will always be conflict. So that's why there is some kind of need for final authority in the household. What happens if the wife feels that the husband is wrong after he consulted even with her? Well, if he's wrong and insistent, that insistence would not be solved by her stubbornness. Because again, knowing male nature, he would insist more, and the more she tried to push forward hardly for her point, the more he becomes insistent, and that is not very healthy for the relationship. That's why the Prophet ﷺ indicated when one woman was asking that if the husband is wrong, you try to explain to him, appeal to him, and he still does something wrong, you have already cleared your conscience and you get your reward from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It does not mean that the Prophet said, all right, be always subjugated, never give an opinion. But this was a very wise advice, that the absence of compliance with what the Prophet said would resolve no problem, would not make him convinced of her opinion, and we get lots of serious family problems, at times even breakup, on a small trivial issue where everybody is just sticking to his guns and want to reinforce his own ideas. Somebody has to give in. The other aspect of obedience also is that many people tend to mix obedience with leadership. And they say, yeah, Islam says that the wife should obey her husband, the husband is the leader, he's the big boss after all. So, what is the point really? A woman in Islam then is totally incapable, they say. She can't do anything by herself. She's not qualified to have any leadership role whatsoever. And that's nothing that is close to truth at all. The Prophet ﷺ used a very good term. You see, leadership is a very common, modern term you find in the books of management. But really, if you look at leadership, not in the sense of how many stars you have on your shoulder, in the formal authority sense. Leadership essentially is influence. To be a leader means that you're able to influence others and to get them to cooperate or to help achieve certain objectives. That is basically leadership. Influence. And when we talk about leadership also in the context of the family, there are two types of leaderships again. Some sociologists, if you take it even from a sociological standpoint, they speak about instrumental leadership and expressive leadership. And it was found that in all societies, virtually, past and present, in different cultures, different religions even, there seem to be certain roles played within the family. The instrumental leadership, which is normally determine the relationship between the family as a whole and the outside environment. And it was found that the major role, not necessarily the exclusive, the major role of that type of leadership has been played traditionally by the husband-father type of role. Expressive leadership, which relate to greater contribution to the family unit internally as a family or social unit, has been traditionally being contributed to more greatly by the mother-wife type of role. It's a sort of complementarity of role played by both of them, but it's not to say that one has leadership qualities, the other doesn't. The Prophet ﷺ also used a very nice term, كلكم راع, instead of just thinking in terms of authority. He talks about responsibility. Each one of you is a shepherd, and each one is responsible for his trust. And then he said the ruler is a shepherd and is responsible, the man is responsible for his family, and he says also the woman is also responsible before Allah. She's a leader in that sense, or shepherd. In that particular context, as I humbly understand it, I think the notion of Qawama has to be examined really carefully. And some of the notions that some brothers entertain, that since women are deficient in mind and thinking and all that, the way they interpret it, which is not necessarily the right one, then they're not creatures to listen to, but they simply have to listen and obey what is told to them. So I think with this kind of attitude, the attitude of respect on the part of the wife, not being too insistent, the attitude of respect and consideration on the part of the husband, I hope that a great majority of problems that unnecessarily damage the stability and the affection in the family relations could be reduced. Another aspect pertaining to relationship between husband and wife, which many speakers sometimes make a short circuit and don't mention it. There's some hang-up in the minds of some Muslims about physical relationship between husband and wife. Whereas if you go to the Quran and to the Sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ, you find that even that particular aspect was not neglected. First of all, one aspect that some sisters may not be very aware of, and in some cases even they're doing the opposite, is to reverse the Islamic values. That is, when they go out in the presence of non-mahrims, they are sharp, all kind of adornment, all kind of showing of their beauty. But when in their own homes, when the poor husband come home, she's smelling onion, her hair is not managed, and start complaining about all kind of things that happened during the day and what his kids did. This is the reversal of what Islam teaches. I'm not saying that she should smell onion when she goes out. I'm saying that hiding or concealing of the beauty is the place when she goes out. But at home, she should look her best. Try to cook a little early and look very nice so that when her husband comes, it's good. And that's not only a suggest of ijtihad on my own. The Prophet ﷺ said that the best of women is the one, if you look at her, she pleases you. Not pleases you because she's a beauty queen or something, because you get pleasant look also when the woman is cheerful, is courteous, regardless of the physical beauty of the face. But it shows also that she has a duty to look good also to her husband. And he says, and the one, if you ask her to do something, she complies or she obeys. And again, we talked about the qualification of obedience. And the one, if you're absent away from her, she safeguards her honor and your property. But on the other hand, some speakers speak about this and forget the other side of the coin. A faqih, Abdullah ibn Umar, was it Abdullah ibn Abbas? Abdullah ibn Umar had this clear understanding of this mutuality of obligations, that he once said, I beautify myself to my wife as she beautified herself for me. The idea here behind it, as one can possibly venture to explain, is that if the husband and wife look good to each other and treat each other well, alhamdulillah, this will help them to save their or safeguard their chastity, and as such there will be little temptation outside. So this is something for the benefit of both, really. But to show again how much importance or attention has been given to all human needs, especially within the family relationship, let me tell you just a brief story that happened during the time of Sayyidina Umar. Everybody remembers Sayyidina Umar as a very tough person who was really very particular about enforcing the right and all that. But this thing happened in his presence. He was sitting with his companions, and a woman came and he said, "O commander of believers, my husband prays during the night and he fasts during the day, and I hate to complain against him, and he's doing all these good things." Sayyidina Umar apparently was not paying much attention, or did not fully understand what she meant. And he must have thought that this woman is crazy. A husband who prays and fasts and do all good things, and she's complaining. So he answered, "Ni'ma zawju zawjik." What a wonderful husband you have. And the woman again repeated, "But Amir al-Mu'mineen, he fasts the day, and he prays most of the night, and he do all good things. I hate to complain." And Sayyidina Umar again, "Ni'ma zawju zawjik." What a wonderful husband you have. It was not until one of the companions who was sitting with them by the name of Ka'b al-Asad, he said, "Commander of believers, this woman is not really complaining against her husband because of food or anything, but I think she's complaining that he does not, sleep with her or, have intimate relationship with her." He said, "All right, Ka'b, since you understood her complaint, you judge between them." The husband was brought, and then the wife started in a very nice and decent way telling a poem, complaining and indicating her case in a very decent way. The husband was a poem also, so he replied how the divine love of Allah has kept him away from thinking all of these worldly things. Ka'b al-Asad was also a poem. Everybody was a poem at that time. A poet. So he started again telling a poet, trying to explain to them that, one still should balance and have some balance in his life. And then he said, "Listen to the husband." That's Ka'b. "Allah has allowed you to get married to a maximum of 4 wives. And if you're married to 4 wives, you've got to spend equally nights with them. So you have to spend 1 night with each wife every 4 days. All right, since you're married only to one, why don't you take the 3 other nights for the worship of Allah and give her the 4th one?" When Sayyidina Umar learned of that judgment, he said, "Ka'b, I wonder what to admire. Should I admire your sharp understanding of her complaint, or should I admire the skillful way you rule to solve that dispute? Go, I appoint you as the judge of Basra." But in return for that, of course, we have to look at the other side too. The Prophet ﷺ also indicated in more than one hadith that if a woman is invited by her husband to bed and she refuses, then this is a major sin. It says in one hadith that the angels will curse her until she wakes up, or in one other version, until he's satisfied with her. It does not mean, of course, that the husband should have an instantaneous wife, that at any moment of time it's a sort of push-button type of thing. That's also contrary to the spirit of Sharia. Because the Quran itself, in Surah Al-Baqarah, in Ayah 223, it says, وَقَدِّمُوا لِأَنفُسِكُمْ. Dealing with the intimate husband-wife relationship, it says, introduce yourself. And one time a question was asked how to introduce. He said, talking, the kiss. The Prophet ﷺ was very clear, talking decently, but also very frank about some of the things, or one of the aspects. It's not necessarily the whole thing in marriage, but it's definitely one of the things that removes lots of misgivings and makes some sort of relaxed relationship. And another hadith also, he said one of the weaknesses of a person, and he mentioned one, of course, if a person just goes with his wife without, being gentle to her or talking over things with her. In another hadith, he said, don't just throw yourself on your wives like animals do. So there's all kind of directions that we get from the Quran and the Sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ, which can be summed up in being considerate and sensitive to the other side, not just trying to achieve one's own need away from the need of his wife. Another aspect, of course, that is exclusively the woman's right all of these issues have two sides, one for women, one for men, but Allah has blessed women with some additional right, of course, the financial support. It is not necessarily mutual. And I would not go into detail that you're all aware of it, that the husband is fully responsible for the household, all the needs regardless of the wealth of his wife, unless she contributes voluntarily any part of it. Before the time is up, I'll just touch very briefly, inshallah, on the other aspect of development of human resources within the family, and that is the question of children-parent relationship. Very briefly, parents are entitled to be obeyed. In more than one place in the Quran, obedience to parents has been placed immediately after the worship of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And that obedience also and birr or kindness to parents has been emphasized more so even in the case of the mother. That kind of obligation involves financial obligation as well, and as we know that if the parents become poor or needy, their children are required to provide financial support for them, even as they supported their own children when they were young. But some of the points that we should remember is that obligation of children toward parents does not end even with the life of the parents, that we have obligation to them even after their death. One, if they have any debts, we have to pay for them if we are able to. If they missed any fasting or hajj, we should do that on their behalf. Many jurists say that you could do that. And in fact, if you make pilgrimage on behalf of a deceased parent, you have to make your own hajj first and then on behalf of others. But another thing also is the making dua for them, remembering them in dua. And what a beautiful dua that maybe we should develop the habit of reciting after salah. رَبِّ اجْعَلْنِي مُقِيمَ الصَّلَاةِ وَمِنْ ذُرِّيَّتِي رَبَّنَا وَتَقَبَّلْ دُعَاء رَبَّنَا اغْفِرْ لِي وَلِوَالِدَيَّ وَلِلْمُؤْمِنِينَ يَوْمَ يَقُومُ الْحِسَابُ. Oh Allah, make me among those who establish regular prayers, also of my progeny. Oh Allah, accept my prayers. Oh Allah, forgive me and my parents and other believers in the Day of Judgment. As far as the right of children, they are entitled definitely with support, and the Prophet ﷺ said that it suffices sin and wickedness for someone to neglect the ones he's supposed to support, that is, wife and children. And I think we should remember that because maybe it might not be as relevant in certain societies than others, but in some places where the parents spend a lot of money on smoking or some other vices or other harmful or non-useful things while neglecting the needs of their own children and their own wives. The child also is entitled to careful attention in terms of physical and health needs, and the Quran has emphasized the suckling of the baby. And again, like indicated in an earlier session, many Muslims will accept things only when it has the stamp of the West. Many people started to consider at one time that nursing, breastfeeding is old-fashioned, and now you have all the highly developed formulas and the science and all this and that. And some Muslims, unfortunately, began to imitate that. But now, when the West itself discovered that there is nothing that compensates the mother's milk, both physically, health-wise, and psychologically, now some Muslims say, oh, it's a good idea to do, it's coming from America. So again, the same kind of mentality. The Quran, if we really follow it, if we really give that importance and place that you place to motherhood, and that applies to sisters and brothers, because some brothers may feel that a mother who is not working, she's just, she's at home. But the equal guilt also lies with some sisters who think that unless they get a job outside, they're not really doing a good job, they're not really fulfilled women, forgetting that the most noble profession ever is the profession of raising children in an upright and Islamic manner. So this is part of the entitlement that cannot be done by babysitters, and only the mother can do it in the perfect way. A third entitlement of the child is the proper upbringing. Not only teaching just information or science or skills, but the upbringing of the child in the true teaching of Islam. And let me make a cross-reference to the earlier discussion on Islamic education and the role of the Muslim family. That we should never wait until the child is a teenager and say, now, he rationalized, we can teach about Islam. The upbringing, Islamic upbringing of the child starts even from birth, from the very moment of birth. Or why did the Prophet say that you should have azan in the right ear and iqamah in the left ear immediately after the birth of the child? Allah knows how does that imprint in his mind. You should make your finger like this with tashahhud to imprint in the mind of the child the concept of tawheed. And as indicated also in a previous session, when you pray, take the child on your lap, make tasbih on his finger, make dua holding his hand. Let him get used to that kind of upbringing. That is why, again, the Prophet ﷺ teach children prayer and fasting as early as possible, but of course in a gradual way. Another aspect that it was promised to be covered in these few seconds from the previous session is justice between children. One question that was sent by a sister about parents who give a great deal of importance to their male children and somehow slap, as the question says, if the boy does something wrong, he's forgiven. If the girl does something wrong, she is slapped. And let us remember the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ, narrated in Ahmad and Ibn Hibban, اتقوا الله وعدلوا بين أبنائكم. Fear Allah and do justice between your children. In a beautiful hadith narrated in Al-Bayhaqi, the Prophet ﷺ was sitting, and a man was sitting near him. So the son of that man came, his boy. So he took him, he kissed him, and put him on his lap. And then his daughter came. He just sat her by his side. It might appear that he was affectionate to both because he impressed her, he sat her by his side. But even then, the Prophet ﷺ was so sensitive to tell him, مَا عَدَلْت. You did not do justice. If you kiss the boy, you should kiss her. If you place the boy on your lap, or like move him on one leg and sit her on the other leg. That is what the Prophet probably meant by that. The justice even in kisses, justice in treatment. Let alone, of course, abstaining from undue insults. In fact, in one hadith of the Prophet ﷺ, special attention is given to the tenderness of the daughter, the girl. When he says that if any person has two daughters and he did not bury them alive, did not insult them and brought them up properly, that is Islamically, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will enter him into paradise. And another saying, he said, a person who had girls like this and took care of them, he and I, the Prophet says, will be like this in paradise, that he will be as close to me as these two fingers. So this is another thing that we have to keep in mind. And this whole cultural notions that we come with, we should shed away and try to take the Islamic values and try to comply with them. One final word, since we talked about the family. Family in Islam is not restricted to the nucleus, husband, wife, children, parents. But the Quran repeatedly speaks about wal-arham, salat al-rahim, like the hadith also of the Prophet ﷺ, the wombs and the relationship of who are not necessarily of the immediate family. And the Prophet ﷺ in one hadith, as he said that al-rahim, that is the relationship based on family ties, say or pray to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, "O Allah, join those who join me and cut those who cut me," which means that to have bad relationship with relatives unnecessarily is something which is also forbidden. Finally, to conclude, if we were talking about the development of human resources and the role of the family, in all of these respects and all of these patterns of relationships, we should not forget again that all Muslims are but one family, regardless of their ethnic or linguistic background, and that the Quran reminds us that the believing men and women are supporters and helpers of each other. They ordain the good, they forbid the evil, they observe regular prayers, and they obey Allah and His messengers. On such, Allah will have His mercy. I pray to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to make us among those on all levels, husband-wife relation, child-father relationship, Muslim to another Muslim relationship, and may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala bless you all. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.